Hey guys, we're back with part two of a podcast with Warren Matthews. Did one the other day and we went through Warren's experience with extensive valve disease and calcification. So, Warren is the founder of Extend Life, a nutraceutical manufacturing business. It's in New Zealand, but it ships 97% of product all over the world. So, it's manufacture and vertical shipping everywhere. And he set up that company around 20 plus years ago because he wanted to add around 20 years to his health span. That was his intention. But he got caught out because no doctor ever talked to him about calcification. So for all of his healthy living, he ended up with a calcification issue and had to get an operation. So anyway, just before we go back to Warren and talk about the formulation he developed over 2020 to address the arterial and valve problems, I'm just going to go through a pulse wave analysis set of data that Warren and his son Kirk got during 2020 since his operation. And he's made a lot of progress, so I think you'll be interested to see the data. I did a little graph of it. So I'm just going to go through that now first. So let's take a look at these results that Warren and Kirk, his son, got on the pulse wave analysis, which again is FDA approved and a very acceptable reflection of arterial age. So we have the ages here. We'll note that Warren was 72 when he got his first test in January 2020, and his son Kirk was 42, who got the test concurrently. So how did Warren do? Well, he came in at an arterial age of 56. Now, presumably, one would expect back here when he had massive calcification and his valve had to be replaced, he wouldn't be coming in with an arterial age that good. But this was after 6 months or so of, reducing the bread and perhaps fewer meals. He had been living healthily for decades in his own mind, no processed food and junk, but really cutting out the bread and carbohydrates would have been important. And of course, he was taking for over 6 months the formulation that we'll talk about later in this podcast. Kirk's son at 42 came in at an arterial age of 73. Now, Kirk is not overly healthy or healthy lifestyle, to say the very least, but this was a bit of a wake-up call for him. So it was great that he got that result to maybe pay some attention to his health. So he began to take the formulation too, understandably. So what happened to Warren when he got his new test, the next test, December 2020? Well, essentially he'd fallen again and a very unusual 40 years old arterial age, which is very remarkable for someone of 73, especially with a history of severe heart disease. So that was excellent, and Warren was obviously very happy. So how did Kirk do? He was the one with the wake-up call. Well, 6 months later, in June, he got another PWA test, and he had been taking the formulation and trying to be better with the lifestyle and diet. And he did very well. He was down to an arterial age of 42, which is actually his real age. So I guess that's a major success also. So anyway, there are the results from the PWA. It's N equals 2. I think this will be a fascinating area to look into going forward. But we'll proceed to Warren now and talk about this formulation of his. It's 8 components, backed up by quite a lot of science, and I vetted many of them and the suppliers. So let's talk to Warren about what they are and give you details on how you can go and source your own, any or all of the 8, or indeed take advantage of Warren's formulation itself. But just before we go to Warren, I'll just give one extra clip from the previous podcast, and I'm showing on the screen now. You can see Warren at the age of 70. So he was sailing solo his boat across to Asia, and you can see he's in pretty good shape. But then a year later, he's flat on his back in the ICU, as you can see now. And he got the surgeon to actually take photos with his phone of the actual procedure, which is kind of interesting too. But such a massive transformation. And that's the kind of thing that can happen when you're focused on health and you think you're tracking all the stuff on the blood markers, but you're not aware of calcification and you're not quite as aware of insulin and other factors as you perhaps should be. So everyone gets caught out. But anyway, with that, Warren, we're back again and we're going to go through this formulation that was a chunky part of that graph I showed back there, most likely.
Yes, looking forward to doing that, Ivan.
Yeah, absolutely. And we might just start. I mean, it's CX8. You put a lot of work into it. I vetted the suppliers and had a good look over everything too. But what was the first? Maybe start with the vitamin D because that's a classic everyone will recognize, and hard to imagine a combination formula for heart health and general health that doesn't include at least a little bit of D, right?
Yes, D is a somewhat underrated vitamin, and it's certainly beneficial to have it there. And instead of using the normal vitamin D, we actually used a form, from lichen, so it's actually a vegetable based. But um, we put in 1,000 IUs, which is okay. But one thing I should say about vitamin D to everybody, watching is that you can't get enough if it's from natural sources. Now, I certainly don't rely on supplements for my vitamin D. I get out in the sunshine, and people should do exactly the opposite, which is recommended and saying you shouldn't get in the sunshine between 10 and 2 o'clock on the day in the summertime. In actual fact, I try to make a point around midday each day of getting out in the sun and exposing as much of myself as I can. And without sunscreen, I don't actually use sunscreen. And at the present time, there's a major deficiency in vitamin D. And so, in addition to taking any supplements, I'd urge everybody to get out in the sunshine as much as possible. Don't get burnt. Just get to the point where you start getting a little bit pink, and then stop it. But do it without sunscreen.
Yeah, I'm absolutely in agreement there. I'm a big sunshine for health person since 2013. And yeah, I'd agree. The only rule is, and it will vary hugely on your skin type, is don't burn. So get as much healthy sun as you can without any burning. And that's the guideline. Very simple. So vitamin D is in there at a reasonable amount, but of course, everything you said, get the sun, get out there. The next one, I just going from memory, tocotrienols. Now, this is one I was not familiar with at all, and I had to do a lot of work to research it. And I had the benefit, of course, with your supplier, Dr. Barry Tan. And we'll connect all this data down below in the description box. He has a book and a white paper. It's all free. Enormous research on these, and I was shocked I wasn't aware of them. But maybe just a few words on your own thoughts on tocotrienols.
This is an interesting one because most people know that vitamin E is supposedly good for overall health and heart health, and we also know that there's two main components to vitamin E. One is tocopherols, which is the normal vitamin E which you get in most supplements, and the other is in fact tocotrienols. Now, we were aware of tocotrienols almost 20 years ago and started using them at that point from palm oil, which was a mix of tocotrienols and tocopherols. But what I was unaware of until coming across Dr. Barry Tam and the research he'd done on tocotrienols is that it's the tocotrienols that actually really give the benefits. And of course, it's not widely used because it's much more expensive than the alpha tocopherols. But what's interesting is if in fact you have too many tocopherols, that it actually will offset the benefits of tocotrienols. And so we found as part of the research that the only form of tocotrienols, which is basically pure tocotrienols, is made from the annatto bean, and that's what the research ended up being around and which we used in this formula, and it's got some incredible benefits. And that white paper that is on the website that you just mentioned, really explains a lot of things which will be an eye-opener for most people. And of course, Barry's book is well worth reading. It's entertaining, it's easy to read. So that had to be a must to go into the formula.
Yep, excellent. And Barry, I must say, a lovely gentleman, multiple PhD, medical doctor, a medical director, and he's been 20 years almost, I think, on this whole area, amongst others. So very interesting indeed, and the resources will be there below for people to look themselves. Uh, Vitamin K2 MK7. Here's one I was more familiar with, but I was delighted to speak to the supplier, Dr. Hogne Vick, and we had a great conversation, and that'll also be linked so people can look themselves with that conversation. And again, medical doctor, PhD, and extraordinary decade of research on this. So What are your thoughts on the MK7?
That's an interesting one because, as you say, it's quite well known that the MK7 is a very, very good form of vitamin K2 for cardiovascular health. There's many, many manufacturers of MK7 throughout the world. And it was interesting that a couple of years ago, as part of the research which I was doing in preparation for this formula, I looked at all the various suppliers of MK7 throughout the world. There's a lot which have been produced in China, which we essentially discounted and didn't go further with, and also found that the two main manufacturers are actually in Norway, ironically enough. And so I spoke to some of the chief scientists of both companies, and including Dr. Hogner, and there was no doubt that the MenQ7 form, which is from what do they call themselves? Uh, in Norway, the company that Dr. Hogner is involved in, was without doubt the best form because they were doing a microencapsulation, which made it more bioavailable, and all the clinical data, was done by that company. A lot of the other manufacturers actually piggyback on that data, even though they have a different product, and there are differences with the form of delivery. Ironically enough, the MenQ7 was the most expensive of the lot, but as I think I've mentioned in a previous time, that cost wasn't the issue for here because this was primarily driven by my own needs, and like we've done with all our products, don't make any compromise. We want the best, and so that's how we ended up with the MenQ7.
Yep, very good. And K2, as I mentioned, a huge following, but the subtleties between MK4, MK7, other variants, and certainly the quality, that's something I did learn from you. I knew there was probably a lot of questionable activities, maybe in the supplement business, but I didn't realize they'd even done studies taking a whole range of K2s, I think it was, and finding 50% or more did not actually deliver the milligrams labeled on the bottle because they were degraded, even when the packages were opened. So I think that microencapsulation and other aspects done by the best suppliers could make a huge difference.
Yes, indeed it does.
So trying to go from memory now, I remember, Tina, Dr. Tina, yeah, had a great conversation with her. The cardiomedia, the omega-7, isn't that the other component?
Yeah, now that's an interesting one. I met Tina in Geneva, and they had developed her company, which she's involved with, which was started by her father, is based primarily around the development of specialized ingredients extracted from the sea buckthorn berry, which is grown wild on the Tibetan plateau, by the Himalayas at 15,000 feet. And what they've found is they've been able to extract out of the sea berry a omega-7. Now, of course, we're all familiar with omega-6, and which we shouldn't have too much of course, and omega-3s, but omega-7, interesting research coming out about that insofar as the benefits for cardiovascular health. And as you'll recollect, you interviewed Dr. Tina, and that's an interesting interview. And also there's a paper which is once again on the website which outlines some of the benefits of it from a cardiovascular point of view. It's actually pretty special, and at this stage it's just not widely available. And in fact, I'm not aware of anybody else who's using that in a formula at the present time. I'm sure it can be sourced, somewhere, but it's got some very, very good properties which are too numerous for me to try and list out here, but refer to the paper on it.
Yeah, exactly. We link everything because, of course, people can go and check these things out themselves, source themselves. That's what it's all about, giving the information. I remember omega-7 I came across actually as a poor metabolic marker because it can, when high, be a marker of metabolic syndrome and inflammatory issues. But the interesting thing is the mechanism may be that the body creates it as an anti-diabetic signaling molecule. So it does appear from the research that actually taking it exogenously can have a beneficial effect, as you mentioned. So we'll link all that data, but very, very good stuff. So cyanthox.
Well, actually, one of the key points which I hadn't mentioned on the cardiomegia is, in fact, its ability to help with metabolic syndrome, and it is another key influencing factor why we used it.
Yep, well, it does tie very much into the metabolic milieu. That would certainly be the case. So, just thinking about Dr. Tina now, and again, interestingly, Tina is a full medical doctor who did her medical degree in Ireland, which is an interesting small world. But her father is also a full medical doctor who worked in pharmaceutical and then went more into nutraceutical. So, what I really liked about these suppliers is full MDs, PhDs. You're not just dealing with business people, which is great. Cyanthox is the other component that's in CX8, and that also links back to Tina and her father's operations.
Most people have heard of Pycnogenol, which is an excellent ingredient from the maritime pine bark, but the cyanothox is actually a lot more powerful than Pycnogenol, ironically enough. And the reason that we got interested in that, it's also got some very good properties from a cell regeneration point of view. There's even studies they've done which shows how it helps stimulate stem cell growth, which of course is all important when it comes to cardiovascular health. So not only from a cardiovascular point of view, it has a lot of other good factors and the overall general health, and interesting enough, in immunity. It's I could tell you some stories about that, but it's off subject at the present time. But it is extremely positive, so it's a very important ingredient, and we've got a good amount in there. Now, I should also mention that what we did in the formula of the CX8 is ensured that the amount that we used of each of these special ingredients were in line with the clinical studies that have given the results. And one of the things which is quite common is to use an ingredient which has got good clinical data, but companies put less of it in and then sort of piggyback on the clinical data. But in every case here, for example, with the MK7, we use 180 micrograms. With the cardiomegia, we use the same as what was done in the clinical trial. Same thing with the cyanothox. All this stuff is really important and is something that is often overlooked. But the cyanothox is it's a pretty unique ingredient.
Yep, now not so commonly available, though again, people can go and source themselves, but it's not yet established and it's early data, so be interesting to see how that one goes. Um, I'm trying to go from, oh, rutin is a more kind of classic, long-term, established kind of antioxidant type compound. I didn't go in too deep into that because it's so established, but you added it in regardless.
Yes, well, it's rutin has been around for a long time. It's a flavonoid, and it's got a lot of very good properties. It is, quite an inexpensive ingredient compared to the others, and there are some benefits with it from a point of view of helping just blood cells in general. So it was logical to include some in it.
Whereas natto kinase, and this is one I wasn't too familiar with at all. I was familiar with natto and the MK7 and MK4 connection, but natto kinase as an enzyme I wasn't. So I went digging. I found an extraordinary white paper from Japan on all of the trials, the benefits, and the data. And I'll link that below actually because it's a one-stop shop I found. From all the papers I got, this one was so comprehensive. So maybe your kind of thoughts on natto kinase.
Yes, we've been using Natto Kinase in our total balance for many years and was aware of the very good properties that it has. But as with a lot of for example, in the total balance, which we use the Natto Kinase, it's not a specialized cardiovascular product, and it uh, needs to be a higher dose to really do its job to spring clean. Now, what's interesting is that although that when I had the open heart surgery, I also had because they had my chest open, they decided they would do a single bypass because one artery I had, was around up to 70%, got a bit of a blockage in there, and whereas it would not warrant doing a single procedure, the fact that they already have my chest open, they figured, oh well, it makes sense to actually do it at that. Do it as well, so I did. But overall, my arteries were, not too bad a shape, and I put this down to a large extent on the Natto Kinase, which was incorporated in our other product, Total Balance. But what we've done in the CX8 is increase the dose substantially. And the interesting thing is that it's a bit like spring cleaning, your arteries, and but you've got to have a decent size and dose, of it. And we use an ingredient called Nattozymes, which is manufactured in the US, and it is basically Natto Kinase, but Natto Kinase is itself is not permitted in the US, although a number of companies do use it. That's because of the method of manufacture, but the way that the Nattozymes is manufactured is approved by the FDA, and it has the same efficacy. So excellent ingredient, and the formula would not be anywhere near as good without it.
Yeah, well, the white paper I have there, as I say, it's very extensive with masses of references, so people can read up the data themselves and kind of get educated on some of these things. And before we go to the last one, I find it interesting that everyone pretty much accepts pharmaceuticals, which are essentially copies of things found in nature. Like statin is leveraged off a mold, I think, or some kind of mushroom mold. And what they do is they basically take nature's beneficial molecules, they have to recreate them in a laboratory setting to make them patentable, so they're profitable, and then they go out and everyone swears by them. Whereas generally people kind of say nutraceuticals and supplements are somehow like, the poor cousin. But the reality is, if the data's there, they can in many ways be more beneficial, for chronic disease and people with issues. People who are healthy and who eat really well may never need any medications of any sort. But it's just an interesting point, the negativity. And I think some of it emanates from the pharmaceutical industry. I'm sure they've got, like we had in corporate, we had competitive intelligence teams who worked legally, in fairness, to just undermine competitors in many ways. So I'd say there's a bit of that going on.
Well, in actual fact, Ivor, I think there's more than a little bit. I remember it must have been about 15 years ago. There's an organisation in the UK, Natural Products Organisation, and they found out that a consortium of pharmaceutical companies, was employing several PR firms, and they was at that time spending £15 million a year to do nothing else but to try and dig up any data which could discredit supplements in any shape or form, and then they would put it together in press releases to make it seem as if it's a news item, and was a concerted program, and it still carries on. And just to make that point, reinforce that point you just made, in that the they try to emanate nature by way of a synthetic molecule, but the body cannot recognize it as such because it's synthetic. So whereas the pharmaceuticals, I think, have a very good role to play for temporary use for a specific condition or to relieve a particular symptom, but not as a long-term health maintenance prevention point of view. I am on no medication at all. I refuse to. The surgeon and the doctor, as I mentioned in part one, insisted that I went on a statin, and I said no way in the world, because I don't think you've done your research, and there's no need, for it, and so consequently, I do not take any medication because I've seen it all before. People get on medication, they have side effects. The doctor then gives them something else to try to deal with the side effects, and that creates other side effects, and nobody knows what is going on in the body. When you've got several, pharmaceutical products and with synthetic molecules, all interacting with each other, nobody knows what's going on.
Yeah, so polypharmacy is certainly a problem. I think the saddest thing is very elderly people in care homes. They're kind of a dumping ground for meds. And I think recently I saw a report that the people in kind of care homes or elderly care, they're on an average of something like 9 medications, an average. So that's like from a few up to like around 15. But anyway, we won't go down a hole on that one. What was the last one now? Oh, yeah, one I wouldn't know as much about, but I was intrigued. Not much data on it, but it is very kind of local to New Zealand. And the high UV environment there is purported to give it its antioxidant properties because obviously the blackcurrant in New Zealand needs enormous protection from the UV, from cellular damage. So maybe we just finish off with that one with a local flavor.
We deal with, and have done for many years, with a company in New Zealand called New Zealand Extracts. And they have a very unique extraction system where we buy kiwi fruit from them, we buy grape seed extract from them, and also black currant as well. And what they are able to do is to concentrate the polyphenols in the out of these particular berries and extract and remove all the sugars and so forth. Now, the reason why we put it in there is not so much based on hard scientific data as the other ingredients have, but rather on more an instinctive situation because we know what is in there and the evidence supporting its use for cardiovascular use is building, but it's still largely anecdotal. So it's one of those things that there was some real potential upside by including it in, and certainly no downside, because worst case scenario, if it didn't specifically give the benefits for cardiovascular health that we want, it certainly is beneficial from overall health point of view. So that's why we put it in there.
Yeah, very good. More of a punt perhaps, but it just when you mention that about benefits of different things, I'm always interested in synergies, the 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing. And again, it can't be known yet because this formulation is kind of unique. Although many very knowledgeable people will be taking several of these things from independent sources, like taking K2 and taking D3 and all. But it'll be good. I think you have an intention in the future to do, a small level trial on this, possibly.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we're looking at some of the options for that now. We released the product, I think it was early last year. We haven't promoted it as such. This is probably the first time that it's had any public exposure. It's mainly been made available to our existing customer base. So we've only got a few thousand people using it at the moment. But we're getting some pretty positive feedback, and but we are looking at doing something which might involve using the pulse wave analysis as part of the data collection material.
Great stuff. I like to hear it, Warren. And anything else then? I'll put all the links below to all these things. I think it's important to stress as well that yes, there's a formulation, yes, there's a product. But the reality is we give all the information. People can go and source all these components themselves as they see fit. But the other thing is side effects. So having gone through all the data extensively, I don't see any shred of a side effect type scenario with any of these natural products. But have you had any reports from the few thousand people who've just recently been taking this? Anyone mention anything or?
What I can say is we've had no reports of any negative side effects, but we have had a report of one side effect from some of our male customers, and to probably put that in perspective, I'll just mention about one of them who actually emailed me recently, unsolicited, and said he'd been taking it for some months now, And what he had noticed was, in fact, he he'd had a long-standing erectile dysfunction problem, and it is now gone. So uh, that's his side effect, and one or two others have mentioned it. But when you reflect on it, it makes sense, because if in fact you're improving the arterial flow, uh, which is often a part of the cause of any erectile dysfunction problems, then it stands to reason. So yes, there are side effects, particularly for men, that we know of, but they're certainly not negative ones.
Very good. Well, I'll hasten to stress I have no interest in that particular thing. I've no need of that. But it's great to hear. Funny enough, yeah, it does make sense though mechanistically, because my interview with Dr. Joseph Kraft, God bless him, the genius behind the insulin assay, he called that out in the interview. And one way he thought people could get interested in the 2 hour insulin test and undiagnosed diabetes would be if the 40 or 50 million people taking the Viagra type drugs worldwide realized that most of their problem was diabetic vascular damage. And then, of course, the nitric oxide and release from the Viagra product has a short term, sudden, and dramatic effect on opening up those arteries. Whereas here, what I think we're talking about, looking at the PWA results, N equals 2, I know, but looking at the results and all the science is a longer term palliative, or not palliative, but prevention type support for the arteries. So it mightn't have the sudden effect of those powerful drugs, but long term it would make sense that it would enable more arterial health and better erections, I guess.
Yes, indeed, and that certainly seems to be what's happening. And but of course, once again, that particular problem, which is not a good problem, obviously, to have, but at least it doesn't kill you, well, not in the short term, and uh, but it just does help demonstrate that obviously, blood is flowing better, and I think that's also indicated, obviously indicated through those other PWA results anyway.
Yep, very good. And I covered those at the start with a graph, as is my wont. Any other comments then? Or I think we've kind of covered the basics. People all wanted to know, well, what did you do? What did you develop? What's in it? So I think we'll have sorted out the curiosity there, and all the details below. That's the key thing. And 3 full interviews with the MDs and PhDs if you want to really delve in, and plenty of reading material as well for all those people concerned about their heart health, want to improve their arterial health, the diet, the lifestyle, and as we laid out in the book, the 10 rules for heart and general health, all crucially important. Exercise, sleep, stress, all those things. But also for people of any potential issue, there are other ways as well. And oh, I remember what the other thing was. You're going to do a ride along offer potentially with magnesium, which we had talked about, crucial for heart health. It doesn't chemically really fit in with putting in the formulation, but you're going to have some kind of offer with a ride along of a really good magnesium supplement to go with the product.
Yes, I should mention something about that, because we normally do not do simple, products. Most of our products are, quite complex, but magnesium is an important, ingredient, and of course, it is something which a lot of people are deficient in. So what we did was put together uh, a specific magnesium product with a little bit of potassium in it, but searched out what was the best form of magnesium. And what we did was come across an ingredient called aquamin, which is actually a magnesium derived from seawater. So they take the seawater and take the sodium out of it, and end up with magnesium plus a lot of the other trace elements as well, which have various other benefits. So what I thought that we would do, Ira, is that if any of your viewers would like to try the CX8, as an added benefit to them, we'll give you a code which you can give to your viewers, and on their initial bottle of the CX8, we'll give them a complimentary bottle of the magnesium, but take it separate from the CX8, because the magnesium can interact with the MK7, and so therefore, best time to take the magnesium is just prior to going to bed at night, and of course you take the CX8 any time during the day. I normally take mine first thing in the morning.
Yep, very good. Okay, appreciate that now. And a lot of people have an interest in this. Heart is the biggest disease in the world, the silent killer. So it'll be great to get that offer out there. And magnesium, yeah, I think because it has somewhat of a laxative effect, I always tend to say to people after a large meal later in the evening, it can also help with sleep. That makes sense. Not on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, or the magnesium will tend to send you to the bathroom in short order. So, very good, Warren. Delighted to chat again. And hopefully, when this viral stuff that's gone a bit crazy lately is over, I can get back to New Zealand. You can get back to Ireland.
Yes, indeed. Looking forward to that, and hopefully all this nonsense will be over shortly. And unfortunately, people are concerned about it, not rightly so, because if your immune system's in good shape, it's not a problem. And I certainly have no fear of it. In fact, I haven't had, the flu for, well, I can't remember certainly not in the last 20 years. But anyway, been good to chat to you again, Ivor, and if there's anything further I can do, then just let me know and we'll talk again.
Great stuff, Warren. Talk soon. Cheers, man.
Okay,
Have a great one.
bye for now.
Hey all, hope you enjoyed that discussion with Warren on his journey and the formulation he developed, which I also had a part in, I'm glad to say. So I was over in New Zealand at his manufacturing plant. I've quite a lot of experience in these things, and I can assure you it's very tip-top quality and ultra-regulated. But anyway, Warren has extended an offer to me, which I can give out to everyone for those who are interested in following up. I hasten to add that, of course, we'll have all the details in the description box below of all the components, and you can go and source your own, absolutely. Though it will probably be several times as expensive, just by the nature of these things. So, Ivor CX8 is the code to use, and for that you'll get 10% off, and for new customers you'll also get a free bottle of magnesium. Now, existing customers will still get the 10% off, but the magnesium, because of system limitations being worked through, can't really be included. So anyway, that code can be used, Ivor CX8. It gives me a little bit of support to continue to allow me to do the work I'm doing, and also, of course, gives the 10% discount to you. So please do look below in the description box, though, and see all the interviews on all the different components and white papers, etc. And as always, do your own research and trust your own ability to decide what's best for your health. So thank you very much, and great if you can pass this on so that anyone who's interested can avail of the offer and keep everything moving along towards better health. I'll just add one more thing, that delivery at the moment, Warren does offer for $6.50, especially to America, a special courier DHL delivery. And that's because in the current scenario, where it normally takes around a week and a half to go to the US, it can be up to 3 or 4 weeks now because of the current situation. So he subsidizes the courier delivery and keeps it down at a low price of $6.50.